I want to come back to the list of recommendations in a moment, but while we're talking about perception issues, there's a perception, and I don't know if it's accurate or not, that there are a lot of false accusations of domestic abuse made for ulterior motives. And so obviously you're dealing with a crime where it's a very serious accusation. If you have a defendant that turns out to be innocent at some point, how much did you consider that in weighing what recommendations need to be made?
That is, I don't think that made it into the report. And frankly, there was not a lot of testimony that was taken on that particular issue. But you are correct. It's a real concern. The reason I say that is because I was a prosecutor in Cass County for 10 years, and so you're there in the courthouse, you're seeing these orders of protection given out by the judges really almost on an hourly basis. There are so many that come in. And usually they're given out by associate circuit judges. And so the question is, does an associate circuit judge ever deny an order of protection because of skepticism that he or she may have about the facts that are coming before him or her? And the reality is, politically speaking, the answer is no. An associate circuit judge is never going to say no. They stand for election. There is the chance that they are wrong, and so in a system that is set up by human beings who are fallible and who have pressures on them in a community, it has become very difficult to give the judges the right kind of set of tools to determine where to say yes and where to say no. And so the community decision that has been made is that judges sign these things. And this risk does exist out there. I think that it comes up a lot in divorce cases. It comes up in child custody cases. And I don't know if anybody has come up with a solution to that.
It's something you hate to be wrong about, but it's hard to know when you are.
I think that's a true statement.
Let's go back to the recommendations, and a couple of times you mentioned the Division of Probation and Parole. Let's talk about how did you want to see their role in this process amended?
Well, the Division of Probation and Parole, we want to see them track these offenders a little bit more. We have cut back in recent years because of budget cuts in the state of Missouri in terms of what crimes the Division of Probation and Parole tracks. And so misdemeanor offenders really are not tracked, except for a few instances, by P&P. We think that probation and parole should take an increased role in making sure that these offenders are tracked, that they check in with a probation officer from time to time so they are reminded that the community is taking this situation seriously and that they are being monitored, watched, and that their behavior is expected to change.
And because you mentioned the funding issue, that brings us back to the reality of putting some of these recommendations into place. And that's an example of where you may run into funding being an issue. When you say you want the division to do these other things, they may come back and say, well, we don't have the money. How are we going to do this?
It's a good point. I mean, funding affects everything in this building. We're sitting in the Capitol as we speak. Funding affects everything this year. Most of there are 12 recommendations in this document. Most of the recommendations don't cost money. A few of them do, but simply because they cost money didn't mean that we shouldn't say them out loud. They are good recommendations, we believe, nonetheless. The legislature has a very difficult challenge on their hands this year, and they will be able to do what they can do, and all we can do. My job is to put good ideas into their hands. Their job is to decide the policy issues before the state.
In the time that we have left, let's talk about that. The recommendations are out. What has happened so far?
Well, we're pretty excited. There's been a lot of bipartisan support for this bill. Senator John Lamping, who is a very talented new freshman Republican out of St. Louis County, I think he's going to file the bill over on the Senate side. Ryan Silvey and a few others are going to file the bill over on the House side. We have Democratic co-sponsors like Representative Chris Kelly, Stacey Newman, Representative Stacey Newman, Democrat over on the House side. So there's been a real bipartisan effort around this. I was saying to a colleague last night that this idea it's an idea and a time period that just happened to meet at the right place. Everything in the building right now is about cutting the budget. It's a very difficult session, and this was one good idea that didn't cost a lot of money, that everybody cares about, and that people on both sides of the political aisle could come together and say, hey, this is the time to change this. So the real good work, we're out of this now. We've done our part. The hard work now belongs to the legislators. They're the ones who get the credit for taking it forward from this point. And so, I have a lot of belief that they're going to have a lot of success with this.
One more question on this topic before we move on, and you had mentioned earlier in the conversation that the shelters that folks go to, particularly women, there's a lot of the shelters that are focused specifically on the women and children and they're involved in domestic violence situations. We have one of those in Moberly.
I visited
Safe Passage, yes.
Yeah, I was up there.
And we've worked with Safe Passage a lot, and it seems like certainly this particular shelter, and this is not a criticism of them or the work that they do, they're always struggling for money. The places that they get money from are very limited, especially with budget cuts, both state and federal. In your report, in your recommendations, do you address any of that?
We go at the back of the report, we do kind of give a summary of where all the money that comes into the system comes from. And it has improved in the last 25 years. It's really improved remarkably in the last 25 years. But still, the problem outstrips the resources. And, these unfortunately, this is part of a local community effort. These are the kinds of things that I think it's highly appropriate for churches, civic groups, social clubs to get involved in and to support. Lord knows there's an incredible need, and the people who reach out for these services are desperate for assistance, and it's really the kind of thing that we as Missourians would say, hey, this community, this is our issue, this is our problem. Jefferson City doesn't have to solve every issue. We in Moberly have families who need help. We come together and we help create a successful solution.
Let's talk about in the time that we've got left. We've got about 8 minutes here, 7-8 minutes. We want to talk to you too about the topic of the healthcare reform package. Obviously, the two chambers have passed resolutions this year that have urged you to some kind of action on that. Let me just get your thoughts on the issue in general at this point.
Well, first of all, it is. I was asked the question the other day by some reporter as to whether I thought that this was a partisan effort, and whether or not I was getting shot at in some partisan fashion, or where the majority, the Republicans in the legislature, were trying to back me into a corner. And I said, absolutely not. This is one of the most important constitutional questions of our time. And just looking at it as a lawyer, as somebody who gets to occupy the position of Attorney General, it's a question that deserves an answer. On top of that, it's a question that the people in the state of Missouri have spoken on. That we had the anti-mandate statute that was on the ballot in August of 2010. 71% of the state supported it. So there is a lot of passion around the issue. The question, it's hard to talk about the question because it is wrapped in this healthcare context. Sometimes I say to my Democratic colleagues, if President George Bush was trying to use the Commerce Clause to privatize Social Security, in a way that had never been done before, what would we be saying about the reach of the Commerce Clause? When we wrap it in healthcare, it's just very hard to talk about because it brings so many political passions to the forefront. So what we're trying to do at the AG's office is to put it purely in a constitutional question, in a constitutional context, and answer the question that is outside of the realm of politics, and that is the Commerce Clause an unlimited vehicle? Does it stretch? Does it have any limits at all? Can Congress do anything that it wants under the Commerce Clause, or is there some, as we live in an environment of enumerated powers of the Congress and the rest of the powers are left to the states, in that enumerated environment, does the Commerce Clause have a limit? And that is the constitutional question. One other hypothetical to frame it as is, the question is, let me ask a different question outside of the healthcare context. Let's say that does the U.S. Congress have the ability to pass a statute that forces you to go buy pre-need funeral insurance? because of the possibility, despite the fact that you've got a job, despite the fact you've got a will, despite the fact that you've got money in the bank, the possibility that you may die broke, and the city of Moberly will have to bury you in a pauper's grave, and that will cost the city of Moberly $1,000. Does the United States Congress have the right to make you go down to your local property and casualty guy, the guy who insures your car, and force you to buy burial insurance or unemployment insurance in the case that you might get unemployed? These are the questions that we are trying to grapple with. And I think that my belief is there has to be some limit on the Commerce Clause. The Commerce Clause is not an unlimited arm. And I believe in a broader health care policy for this country. I think it is the greatest challenge that this building faces. I think it's the greatest challenge that the country faces. But my obligation is not to a political goal. It is, my oath is sworn to the Constitution. And if in achieving a higher political goal, we have bumped up against the limits of the Constitution, my job is to say it clearly. We've bumped up against the limits of the Constitution. Again, the political goal has to be subservient to the constitutional limitations.
So, and you, bearing everything that you have brought up in mind, then, for the folks who are asking, okay, then what are you going to do about it? More specifically, are you going to file a lawsuit? Will you join one of the ones that's out there? What are your thoughts on that so far?
Well, we are. There's a heck of a lot of work that is going into this right now. In fact, if we went back to my office, you would see probably a 4-page document that I've been working on for a couple days trying to respond to Senator Mayer, Representative Tilley, and Lieutenant Governor Kinder. It's not an easy document to write. It's not just like a yes or no or a me too. There's a lot of legal analysis that is going into this. There is, at 9 o'clock last night, I came back from the Mizzou basketball game and was back in the office dealing with the individual who is preparing the court materials on this. And we spent another hour working through ideas and strategies and what we were going to say. And he had been working all day on this document. So we are not sitting idly on this. We are working actively. It is very complicated legal work to do. And one of the problems is that the constitutional lineage of the Commerce Clause over the last 150 years is pretty convoluted. Even the federal courts are having difficulty dealing with this. So, give us a few more weeks, and we're going to have something coherent to say to my colleagues in the legislature.
All right, just a little bit of time left. You mentioned your website already, where folks can see some more information on the domestic abuse testimony and some other things. How can folks find that? www.ago, which stands for Attorney General's Office, ago.mo, which stands for Missouri.com. No, .gov. ago.mo.gov. Go there, and you will see a link that takes you to the domestic violence report and some of the recommendations that we have. Attorney General Chris Koster, thank you so much for your time.
It's good to see you.
This has been Mike Lear. We'll send it back to the studio.